as we've seen on the channel before, the Master System's library of shmups may have been smaller than its rivals of the time, a result of its relative failure in its home country. Despite that, if it's one thing which can be said is that the smaller library made room for some seriously top-notch titles to fill the void, as we see with Power Strike 2. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. Power Strike 2 comes to us once again from Compile, with a 1993 year of release, placing it well towards the end of the Master System's commercial life cycle. Whilst its predecessor saw worldwide release, this time around Power Strike 2 would only be released in PAL territories. Though billed as a sequel to Power Strike from 1988, it's really only one in terms of its mechanics only, for the most part. Power Strike 2 isn't set on a planet in the far future, but rather our very own Earth, or at least an alternate version of it, specifically an alternate version of the 1930s, one in which the Great Depression has hit and greatly affected the populace. In order to survive, many of those who have been impacted have now turned to becoming air pirates, harassing civilians and making life even harder for everyone. To put a stop to them, bounties have been placed on their heads, with those seeking to claim them and clear the skies known as pot hunters. And you're one of them. If you've played a Compile shmup before, you'll know most of the tropes in play. From the dual weapon systems which your craft uses, to weapons which are identified only by numerical pickups, it's generally pretty easy to pick up Power Strike 2 and dive right in. But it also offers quite a variety of differences, as you'll see pretty much when starting the game. You've got your opening menu here, giving you the option to pick which secondary weapon you want to start out with. Not only that, but you can set your difficulty to one of 4 levels, along with an option added for convenience to allow you to pause the game without needing to reach out and access your Master System itself, though there's a little side effect with this one. When you've set your options and dived into the action, that's where the big changes to the Compile formula really come into effect though. Gone are the time-limited secondary weapons. Regardless of which weapon you start out with, you'll keep it, even after dying. Well, at least until you pick up one of the numbered capsules you'll see around. Collecting a capsule marked with the number corresponding to the weapon you've already got will upgrade it, indicated on the lower section of the screen underneath the number indicating which weapon is active. As for your primary weapon, this could also be upgraded by collecting the P capsules released by other enemies. Alongside these, there are also some other pickup types, ones which can clear the screen of all enemies, and one which gives you orbiting shields. Along with blocking enemy fire, they'll also augment your primary gun depending on the colour picked up. Red ones increase your firepower, blue ones allow your bullets to pass through enemies, with the yellow ones enabling spread fire. All of those are incredibly handy, especially in the more frantic areas within each level. Your fighter has 2 additional features on board. The first, being able to adjust your speed. Finding the right one here is a bit of a balance between your reactions as a player, but also your preference for precision. It's also worth noting that that option which allows you to pause the game from the controller will interfere with this, as using the controller to unpause the game will also increase your speed by a level. The other feature, which is a little fancier, is a charge shot. When holding down the fire button for a brief period of time, you'll see a blue energy wave appear ahead of your fighter. Letting go of it at this point will unleash a blast capable of clearing out a tight group of enemies, or do some solid damage to an end-of-level boss. End-of-level bosses aren't really a surprise. As with any good shmup, you'll need to learn their patterns and figure out your strategies to take them out, without dying in the process. Death, of course, does carry a penalty here, though it's far less harsh than in many other titles. For many shmups, dying typically clears out all the upgrades you've accumulated. Things, though, are much fairer in Power Strike 2. The power of your secondary weapon is now halved on death, meaning you could still be in the fight, especially if you've upgraded it quite a bit. It does go a long way to making that experience a little fairer. It's interesting comparing this to Compile's earlier titles like Power Strike or Xanac. It wasn't just about losing all your weapons on death, which made the games tougher, but their infamous adaptive difficulty systems. It's certainly quite easy to be in a position where you could be overwhelmed as a result of dying. And this really is one of those areas where Power Strike 2 stands out. The adaptive difficulty system is gone, and sure, it makes for an exciting bullet point on the box, but in practice, it takes the learnability out of the game, because you just can't learn the levels, as every time you play, the outcome and difficulty varies from the most minute factors, things like the number of shots you fire, which enemies you take out or which you miss, and so on. With Power Strike 2, every level plays out the same, at least when you have the difficulty consistently set. It means the layouts and patterns can be learned, and the result is you can ultimately master the game and see it through to the end. And do this without becoming an unnatural super person and ultimate shmup master. This is really this continuing refinement which Compile's games showed over the years between the original Power Strike coming out and this sequel. From the ability to choose which secondary weapon you start out with, introduced with Alesta 2, to the changes which were made in titles like Gunhead or Gunnack, which saw the secondary weapons become permanent and actually useful, rather than limited by a certain period of time or number of uses. This results in Power Strike 2 just being a much more approachable game for players, whether veterans or newbies. It makes it far more enjoyable and much nicer to play because you can learn it and beat it without those super skills. Each of the levels offers a great variety of visuals. The scenery within each does change up as you progress, making each mission feel more like a journey and less of an endless flight over the same location. They'll also offer their own unique sets of enemies. Mostly focus on the grounding placements you'll negotiate, but you'll also see unique aerial ones as well. The sprite work may consist of designs which are anachronistic to that early 1930s time period, but they are not unsuited to the game. They feature a stack of well-drawn, coloured and detailed objects. All of them are presented on screen with great clarity and readability, which is really important for being able to see just what is happening. Even better, this is all done with minimal flicker on screen, and little to no slowdown at all. A great improvement over the first Power Strike in particular. It's another point for how Power Strike 2 is far better put together than its predecessor. The Master System's hardware is pushed quite hard here, and it holds up exceedingly well. Of course, this is possibly a reflection of the game being optimised for those PAL systems, where many other games in the library just weren't. The downside of this PAL-only focus is that when it comes to the sound, you only have the base PSG audio. There's no support for the Master System's FM unit because it wasn't officially released in the West. Now, each stage does offer its own unique theme, and the sound effects to go with them are quite well crafted. There are unique sounds for each of your weapons, alongside the typical assortment of what you expect in a shmup. Your explosions, pickups, and all of those things. And of course, the trusty Compile jingle which you'll hear when scoring an extra life. The soundtrack here really is quite enjoyable to listen to. It flows really well and it gives you that good sense of pacing. It's a great contribution to the atmosphere of the game. So when we look at the catalogue of shmups on the Master System, Power Strike 2 really stands out above the crowd by far. From its variety of difficulty levels and tweaking on offer, the general game's pacing, giving you nice moments where things are chilled, but others which are quite intense, that improved weapon system, and its really tight controls. It really makes for a shmup which is engrossing and challenging, and not in a way which was inflexible the way which Compile's earlier games were. Now, despite this game doing so many things right, there are two issues which I feel contribute to making it lesser known for players. The first, that PAL-only release. Though a large portion of the Master System's fanbase is situated in PAL regions, very few of Compile's games, prior to the original Power Strike, actually saw a release there. So, most of their reputation for high-quality shooters was kind of unknown in PAL regions. As a result, for those who really do want to play it, you're absolutely going to need a PAL Master System, or a Mega Drive with the appropriate converter. Running it on an NTSC system or under emulation, which typically defaults to NTSC, will make the game run at a much faster pace. And this pace is enough to make it unplayable as a result. Anyone who's got into classic PC gaming will know that experience for sure. The second factor which impacts this game is the cost on the secondary market. If you're not hardcore into Pile's work or its legacy, and you're not going after a complete set of Master System games, the pricing is quite high, and for most people, it's probably going to be considered too prohibitive. If anything, Power Strike 2 is a reason to not discount the idea of 50Hz gaming. Whether you have a PAL Master System or Mega Drive with appropriate adapters, having a flash cartridge is really worth it to be able to play this on original hardware. The PAL exclusive nature of it, especially when modern gaming platforms, even for PAL region people, run at 60Hz, means that this is not one that's really going to get a chance of being adapted and reissued like many classics from the era are. And for me, this is something which is an absolute shame. Power Strike 2 is not just an amazing shooter, but quite frankly, it's one of, if not the best shmup which ever graced an 8-bit gaming platform. And so with that, it's time to tie this episode up and draw it to a close. If you've enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up and do consider telling your friends about this video. Word of mouth can be incredibly helpful for small channels like mine in this day and age. If you haven't already, do consider hitting the subscribe button and, yes, hitting the notification reminder if you're after more videos like this, providing insightful looks at how interesting games play on classic computing and gaming hardware. If you want to support the show in a bit more of an active way, why not check out the channel's Patreon page for more details on how you can do that. Finally, and most importantly of all, thank you all for once again taking another voyage beyond the Scanlines.